Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Thriving the Dissertation webinar series, hosted by Eastern University and their Dissertation Writing Circle. Tonight, we will have Dr. Carron Odakara give us a presentation on the essential components of defending the dissertation. And Dr. Odakara is or was a corporate IT manager for over 20 years, while she served as an associate pastor for 10 years in Southeast Michigan. See, we are all over the place tonight. And she previously served as the vice chair of the National Board of Directors for her faith group and as president of the Wesleyan Holiness Women Clergy, working across denominations to equip and empower hundreds of women in ministry. She serves on the board of directors for Children of Promise and is an adjunct professor at Anderson University. She has her bachelor's and master's degree in science in electrical and computer engineering and a master's in divinity. And in 2021, she actually earned her Ph.D. in organizational leadership from Eastern University. And her dissertation was a multi-case study of racial and ethnic diversity and inclusion across selected U.S. Christian denominations, for which she actually received the university's Dissertation of Excellence Award. So I welcome Dr. Odakara.
All right. Well, thank you. Glad to see you all. Let me make sure that, first of all, you can see my presentation slides.
You are in, we see your mode.
Oh, wrong screen then. Sorry about that. Let me make sure I am sharing the right screen.
There we go.
There we go. All right. We tested this before and always, IT stuff. All right. Well, glad to see everyone here. Got some slides to take us through, and then I'll be open for questions towards the end. So I am part of the class of 2021. Starting to feel like it's been a while ago. I am, for those from an Eastern perspective, I was cohort 8. So you all were talking about cohort numbers, and I was starting to feel old in terms of cohort numbers, but it gives us hope to always see, at least it did me when I was going through the program, to see somebody that was ahead of me in the steps and somebody that had finished. So I'm ahead and finished both. We're just going to talk about a particular part of the dissertation process, and that's the proposal defense and what's necessary and contributes to getting you into that so that then you can continue on, and we'll talk about that as we go. So just to give a feel for what we're in for this evening agenda, just talk about the stages and understanding and orienting. Faith and I had talked about that ahead as we were preparing here. Writing and preparing the proposal, because that's essential so that you're ready for that defense step. Preparing for the proposal defense, and then after your successful defense, because you will be successful, we'll talk about some things that you want to remember as you're then going forward to the next stages, and then I'll have it open for questions and discussion. However, if there's something just totally unclear, or if I misspoke or something like that, you just got to know something at the time, just feel free to jump in and just ask. So it's kind of a high-level process view. You heard I was an engineer, so one of the things that really puzzled me as I was starting into the dissertation phases, what are all the pieces that I have to do and deliver it and get to the completion stage. So different schools, because I know we have a couple other schools represented here, may have slightly different terminology for some of the phases, but starting out, the concept paper that presents your initial idea and methodology and kind of your plans for what you're about to do. And then the pre-proposal meeting, which the concept paper can also be considered like a pre-proposal to the work, when you're meeting with your committee, getting feedback, and then getting the go-ahead to go into the proposal. We'll talk about what's included in that, but that's like essentially the first half of your dissertation. Then there's the defense. That's a much more involved defense, and that's kind of what we're going to be talking about tonight. But then that leads into the final aspects of the dissertation, where you go into data collection, analysis, and you present have your findings. The thing you present at the final defense, and then after that, you get the poofy hat, which I never really was into the poofy hat. I was more into the hood and the sleeve and the stripes on the sleeves, but the hat was easier to stick into the flow to give you a feel. So what we're going to focus on this evening is the defense, but realizing we want to talk about what leads into that defense. So kind of the proposal and the proposal defense. I see somebody's got a chat. So Faith, if you could keep an eye on the chat, and if there's something that needs to be like a question to be addressed, just feel free to jump in as well and help folks out.
Will do.
So, rules for the entire process you need to understand and you need to follow. First of all, is like get the handbook for your school. This is the last version for the Eastern, just the cover page. Get that handbook and actually read it. There's some logistics things to think about. There's some learning in there. There's some how do you format your title page and all those kind of little details that you may not want to be bothered with, but you will be bothered with at a point in time. And your chair will appreciate it if they don't have to remind you of this important aspect, because it's a given that if you're a PhD candidate going into this process, you should be able to take care of some of these kind of business matters. So follow the dissertation handbook and follow the guidance of your chair. Chairs are different. Each chair operates a different way, but the chair is kind of your first line of defense, your first line of interaction with the committee, and that chair is kind of the gatekeeper for the steps and progressing you through the process. And so they are going to do their best to guide you in this process, because it's to your benefit so that you can get through, even though sometimes you may not feel like that's what's happening. But it's also to their benefit because they don't want you to waste your time and their time and the committee's time going through phases of the process where you're not prepared to best represent yourself as well as your research. So those two guidelines, if you do these two things, it'll get you through everything else that we're going to talk about. But I do have some additional tips and things for you to think about as you're going ahead. Supposed to advance. There we go. So to the phase past the concept paper that we talked about during kind of the last closing classes of the dissertation process, or the coursework process. I was like, what's proposal? Like I'd never heard of that term before. And the short answer to it is the first three chapters of your dissertation. So it's going to include a lot of the front matter, and a lot of this will be in your handbook. If you're worried about like, oh, am I going to remember all this? That's kind of what the handbook is for. All the list of tables, table of contents, all that kind of, logistical pieces to put together. Chapter 1 is the purpose of the study, research questions, hypotheses, your rationale, why this study is even worth doing, some kind of short version of the literature so that you can identify the gap that is there, and a bit about your research design. So if somewhat, it feels like an encapsulation of a lot of your dissertation, or at least a lot of the proposal in chapter 1, but it's kind of an abbreviated form for that introductory information. Chapter 2 is the lit review, and you will read, and you will read, and you will read, as you going through literature until you keep going to your chairs like, is that enough? Come on, is that enough? Really? Come on. I must be getting there at some point in time. I actually just talked to someone that was in my cohort that got delayed because of medical issues, and he said he's having to do even more on his lit review. So this is where you're going to spend a lot of time on the proposals, on that lit review. The other thing is the chapter 3, which is really focused on your research method, how you're planning on conducting this study. Not just the methodology, but getting into the details of how are you going to get this data? How are you going to distribute your surveys? How are you going to find participants for interviews? If you in quantitative, which instruments are you using, and making sure that you know that they are validated instruments that are appropriate to use, and then how you're going to gather this data and analyze it so that you will be prepared to uh, go into the actual research. So that's chapter 3. And then I had some references. I had like drafts of consent forms for participants. I had drafts of interview questions, and you may have to give some additional information on instruments or whatever the case might be. And that's where, the chair that you have can help guide you on the specifics and their expectations around that. And so this proposal is really setting you up to do the research. But as in anything, it's better that you plan ahead, and the proposal is the plan for your research. And so they're going to make sure that your plan is well put together. So as you're preparing the proposal for the defense, you're gonna have a lot of things that have to come together in a lot of different sequences, starting with your committee chair, their expectations and their feedback to you. At some point in time, once you get past your chair, they'll want to engage the committee for their reviewing comments. And as you're getting all of that feedback, you're editing things and re-editing things and editing things again. And depending on if you're like me as an engineer who's not, English isn't what you want to do. If I have to put more than bullet points on a slide, that's just not a lot of fun, but it's part of the process. So that make sure you're clear, making sure you're covering everything appropriately. And out of that entire process that can take varying amounts of time, just brace yourself. It can take some time. You will come out of that process with a dissertation proposal that's ready for defense. Okay. So now we go into preparing for the proposal defense presentation. Now you're likely going to put together slides, and depending on where you are, where your committee is, it may be in person, it may be in Zoom, but you're going to have slides, whether it be PowerPoint, Canva, or whatever presentation software you would choose to use to help visually convey some of the things that are in your proposal. At least for me and many of my peers, it was like a 20 to 30-minute presentation, and you realize my proposal was like 100 pages. So you're kind of consolidating, just some high points from that. But you also have to realize your chair's read this multiple times, your committee has read this, and so you're just kind of coming up with the key points that need to be available for discussion. And so that's why you want to focus on the core aspects from chapters 1 to 3. First of all, you want to tell the why, why this research, your purpose statement, your research questions, your rationale, your significance. And I put here the literature gap because the literature review, chapter 2, is such a huge part of your work and effort to develop the proposal. You have to realize it has to be a small piece of the why, but just enough to convey that you are adding to the research that's out there by addressing the gap. So whatever it is you need to convey that gap is what you want to include as a part of your why this research is necessary. And then you're going to explain the how. And the how is really going at chapter 3, your research design, looking at what methodology you've chosen, your data collection, your analysis. And for me, like I said, I'm an engineer, so that was actually the fun stuff. I was happy with chapter 3. Chapter 2, that was a challenge, but we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and you'll get through it. So that's kind of the core content that you want to make sure you cover. The other thing that you may want to think about, this was kind of learned along the way, is consider talking to others who've completed their proposal defense. I mean, every defense is different, every topic's different, but you can get an idea. Not so much you're worried about, what happens in it other than logistically, some pieces, but more just like, is there any other tips, particularly if it's someone that has your chair, because they can give you a perspective of the types of things they might be expecting. And that's a piece of advice that probably applies all the way through the dissertation process, is to get some of those lessons learned and what you can glean from others that are in the process with you or a little bit ahead of you. Know your audience. You have an audience of three, and it's three people who have read your document. They are the three people on the planet who have probably read your document anywhere close to as much as you have, realizing you've gone through multiple revisions. But those three people know your research, and so they're going to look for things that they can discuss with you, offer you as feedback, ask you questions to strengthen the proposal. And so that's one of the things you want to make sure you're ready to respond to the committee's questions. The questions they ask you, it could be things about the literature, it could be things about the design, but all of it is oriented to making sure that they're comfortable that you have a solid basis and a solid understanding of what you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to go about doing that. All right, next slide. So for the meeting itself, plan for your setting. Like we were talking about dealing with Zoom meetings here and making sure the slides were visible, those kind of things. If you're on Zoom, if you're in a room, if you're mixed obviously to me is always the biggest challenge, making sure that you have those logistics worked out as to how you want to do it, how you want to set it up. If you're at your house, how you want to set up your desk environment and everything else. I've got my two big monitors here and I've got my little laptop monitor here, and so I know exactly what's on each screen, and so I can make sure that I've got everything covered. So plan for your setting and test your technology. And we all know that even if you test your technology, something will happen anyways, but at least if you work out most of the kinks, try it out. It will give you a better sense of relief as you're going into it. Those are the things you don't want to have to be challenged with, because you're probably going to be wanting to focus more on really what the proposal is about in working with your committee. Just to meet your timing. I know that that has been a challenge for a variety of people that I've talked to, because they want to kind of time box this, so because you could go on and on and on because you've spent months and months and months working on these three chapters, and you want to make sure that you're representing those high points and doing it in a timely fashion based on what they feel like is the priority for you to address with them. And that's once again where your chair can give you some additional guidance. I actually sent my slides to my chair ahead of time just so she could kind of give a quick once over and say, you probably don't need to go into all of this part, that kind of thing. Idea for you: present to a classmate for feedback and questions. I had a small group of people that we were a writing circle together that met on a regular basis to encourage each other to keep going and keep working and hold each other accountable. And one of the things that we did for one another is when somebody was coming up to a defense, we would be their audience so that they could just practice on us, and we would know maybe nothing about their methodology other than what we learned in our intro quant or intro qual class. We would know nothing about their topic content area, but we would just sit there and create questions to ask them, because we're all PhD students, and so we're educated enough that we can kind of help each other out in that way. And so that was helpful to us in terms of preparation, but it also, I think it gave the personal level of confidence. It also gave the rest of us, some thought process around what we needed to do for when we were ready to be at the various stages. And one of the things that I would also say is make sure you just be yourself and present how you're comfortable. I know we had some people that did a lot of public speaking, and so there was no big deal, no big issue there. We had some people who were very nervous and they scripted every single word that they were going to say, and just never felt comfortable. You do what you need to do to convey the content. You're not graded on how eloquent you are. You're graded on how strong you are in the information and the methodology that you have, and make sure you can convey that. And whatever you need to do to make that happen, make sure you do that. So you go through the meeting, you do it with your your professors, your committee, and you come out of it, and there's like three options that happen. You either get approved and you're good to go, just straight to your IRB and on to like data collections once they approve you, or you may have to go back and make some changes to make sure that you send those off and have the agreement of the committee, but you're still basically a provisional approval there. Or the other option is there's a lot more changes, a lot more thinking, or some additional literature that you need to think about that you didn't think about, and you really need to do some rework, major rework on your proposal, and then come back for a defense. Most people I know got the first approval or revisions required before approval. I don't personally know anybody that had that third option. And part of that goes back to what I was saying of how your chair wants to work with you and not put you forward until you're ready, based on their experience in helping many students through this process. So after your successful proposal, you definitely need to celebrate. You need to like do something with some friends or family. You need to go out to eat, whatever it is to celebrate. Take a night off. Don't start revisions quite yet. Don't start your IRB application quite yet. But then a couple of things to think about is that you want to make sure you do come back, work on your changes requested by your committee if necessary, because you may or may not have changes at that point. But one of the things that a lot of people tend to forget, maybe their chair will remind them, but then you can just be ready to go with these kind of things, is complete your forms for the proposal defense approval. Have those ready to go so that you can get those sent out to your chair, your committee. Make sure you get that, confirmation of that step. It's important just to make sure you're going through the process. You document those steps, and depending on scenarios with life circumstances, I've seen people have to say, "Well, no, I did complete that," if they wound up having to have some changes of things with the committee. Moving forward, I said there's more to the process that is, a webinar for a different night, but moving forward, tips coming out of that proposal defense: don't think your literature review is done. Keep reading, keep looking for more and more updated content. See if anybody is intruding upon the gap you identified, and you can compare and contrast to their research. You'll also have some additional literature review to address, some of those findings and that understanding that comes out of the remaining chapters. But keep researching more literature. And the other thing that I didn't really know was that you're going to have some major changes to the proposal at the end. I mean, you feel like you defended it, it's done. But what happens is the proposal was what I'm going to do in research. And then after you conduct your research, you actually have to go back and rewrite chapters, especially chapters 1 and 3, maybe some with chapter 2, depending on what literature you may run across. But to say, not in the future what I will do for research, but what I already completed, and how that then changes some of the wording in chapter 1 and chapter 3. So I know that's bad news, but at least if you know it ahead of time, you're bracing yourself and you're planning for that time when you're doing your final dissertation edits. So with that, one of the key things to remember is this whole process is really yours to drive. It's not your chairs, it's not anybody else. It's a very independent activity to conduct this process of getting through the research and completing a PhD. But you do have resources, work with your chair, and you'll get it done. It's a matter of persistence and sticking with it. And life happens, but this is your process to drive. Work with your chair and get it done. And with that, I'll just open it up for questions.
Thank you so much. That was really, I just learned so much that even when we think we're there and we've gotten the approval, that we're still in the beginning stages. what do you do when somebody is encroaching on your space with the when you find them in your lit review?
I think that depends how they're encroaching. I mean, I said that, very simply. If they've kind of done a piece of it, a piece of what you were trying to do, you might make some adjustments. I mean, I kind of came into the program at Eastern with a topic. I was like, I am going to study multicultural churches. And I kind of decided, that's been done multiple times. Eli Lilly has funded studies on this, and there's some great resources. And not to say I couldn't have found a space different than that, but I actually wound up shifting, kind of staying in the multicultural church mode, but then shifting organizationally and looking at denomination. So there's ways that if you see that somebody has been in your space, you can either take narrow your gap and shift it a little bit, or you can shift it more significantly. But that is one of the things that is, the premise of the dissertation, is that you're doing something a little bit new, but it's not like something revolutionary new. It can just be a nuance or a piece or an angle or dimension that somebody hasn't looked at before. So don't get worried about it, but that may make you reframe some things a bit.
Anybody else have any questions?
I
What was
have
the-
I
Go
have
ahead,
a
Deb.
question. I'm wondering if Dr. Odakara will come back and talk about the actual defense rather than the proposal defense, the defense of the dissertation.
We'd love to have her back.
Do that. I know that there's a series that is defined, and there may or may not be somebody already defined for that. That's something I don't know if Faith has that or Dr. Hernandez
I
probably
was
has
like
that.
that as the person who's been organizing them, there's not. So we'll set you up probably. Deb will probably be August, the beginning of the fall semester, because we have everything. We've got March and April, and nobody's going to come on in May when for us it's it's the end of the semester. But I would make it early in the fall semester. I'll absolutely.
I would be so grateful.
You got it.
A quick couple of tips for you is some of the things apply totally to each defense in terms of preparation and logistics and things like that. Probably the key difference would be the emphasis. The emphasis would be chapters 4 through, however many you have. If it's quant, it's probably 5. If it's qual, it may be more than that. And focusing on the findings and the just minor updates to the introductory information, but that's probably the key difference in that defense. But we could definitely talk about it more. And honestly, if you wanted to email me on the side, I'd be glad to have a conversation with you.
I'm back channeling with some of the rest of my cohort and getting other people who would request that. So I appreciate your offer, but I'd like to wait until Faith and Dr. Hernandez could put together an actual webinar so other people could benefit.
That's awesome, Deb. Thank you.
I just thought if you had one coming up, you might want to wait till August.
We're okay waiting till fall.
What was the time difference between your defense proposal and you being done?
Oh boy. I might have to go look that up. I want to say 3 years, because I spent a good year with the challenges of data collection for a variety of reasons. Maybe a little over a year. So maybe 3.5 or so. Paper approval came fairly decently. The proposal took longer than I thought it should, but following the direction of my chair and all those revisions, but then, proposal to final defense, that, a lot of that was, finding, or for me, finding organizations that would sign off and participate, finding participants, scheduling interviews, things like that. That's why some people immediately want to go to quant. Although I have a friend who did a primarily quant dissertation, and she struggled to get people to take her survey and things like that. So, there's challenges no matter which way you go, and it will take longer than you want. I blew my original timeline totally out of the water, but you just keep going, one step at a time, one day at a time. You can do it.
Anybody else have any questions?
You mentioned completing the forms for a proposal defense approval. Do you do that right after, or do you kind of have it set and ready to give or to sign off right after you're done your proposal defense?
Got it set and ready, partly because my chair told me, like, I'm going to expect you to have these forms, work on these forms. And because, like, leading into the proposal defense, there's lag times, where you're waiting for the review, you're waiting for any feedback or questions back. You can fit some of those things in. I even had started to fill out my IRB application while I was waiting for the proposal defense, but I couldn't send it in until it was over. So you're always going to look for those filler things that you can do to just feel like you're keeping things moving.
All right, thank you.
Anybody else have a question? You said your proposal was 100 pages. How long was your final dissertation?
295, I think. Well, remember. Quant tend to be a little bit shorter numbers versus putting quotes into some of the findings chapters, but yeah, I
How many
don't know
chapters
if
was
I'll
that?
ever write anything that long. What's that?
How many chapters?
6 it wound up being. It was going to be 7, but that was once again qual and the guidance of the of my chair, because it was a multiple case study. So the findings on each case was one chapter. So 4, 5, and 6. Well, actually, I take it back. No, it was 7, because it was like the summary, concluding matter kind of thing. Yeah. It's not like, I mean, that gives you a sense of mile markers. Okay, I finished that chapter, and oh man, I have this many more. But it's really more about getting through the content to appropriately represent it, and sometimes it can be more or less. Is anybody preparing for a proposal defense coming up? Final defense?
You may have scared us.
Gee, I like, you can do this. You really can. There were times I felt like I couldn't, but I made it, and you can make it. A concept paper, pre-proposal kind of meetings coming up. Anybody? Or are we still working on coursework? Is that primarily where folks are at?
Cohort 15 will do their concept papers this summer.
Okay. All right. Well, it's
Coming
good
up.
to start getting these things in your head now. And then when you come to the moment, then I think they'll have these probably posted somewhere where you can review them and get, refresh your memory on some of those tips.
All right. Anybody else have any questions? So there's no questions in the chat. Well, Dr. Odakara, I want to just thank you so much for joining us tonight and educating us, and giving us very clear pathways that we need to go. Let us see how far we need to go. But thank you so much for giving us your time. We appreciate you. And especially for those of us from Eastern, would you like to close us out in prayer?
Absolutely. God, thank you for this day. Thank you for this time together. I pray your blessings on those who were able to join us and those who were not. I pray that you give them endurance, perseverance, and insight as to what they need to do each step of the way. Keep them moving day by day through this process you have for them. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you
Dr.
so
Odakara, do you want
much.
to hit stop on the record?
Yeah. Faith, thanks for making this happen.
Thank you, Liz. And Deb will absolutely make that late August.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
you. No problem.
Thank you.
All right.